Okay, so this is chapter 1. It's called The Science of Nutrition. We're going to see in this chapter that we're going to cover a lot of topics that we'll cover in more detail as we go throughout the course in later chapters. I'd like to start each chapter off with a set of learning outcomes or learning objectives. And I won't read this list to you, but by the end of the chapter, I hope that you can look back at this list and hopefully this list makes sense to you. We are going to cover and hit everything on this list. Okay, so in the introduction to this first chapter, where again I'm introducing you to this concept of nutrition, we start off by talking about the leading causes of disease in the United States. And here in this pie chart, it breaks up the leading causes of disease and tells you the percentage of individuals who die of these particular causes. And what we can see here, what I want to highlight is that if you look at A, right, which is 23% of this pie chart, and B, which is 21% of this pie chart, and then we can include in here C as well, which makes up about 5% of the pie chart, and then F, which is about 3% of the pie chart, and H and I, which are smaller percentages here, 4 and 2%. But all of those have a link to diet and nutrition. And so what are those? So A, which is 23% of deaths in the United States, are caused from heart disease or diseases of the heart. And again, diet plays a role here, as does alcohol use, as does tobacco use. So you can see down here, these special markers, these attributes tell us, what plays a role. So diet would be the star here. This cross is going to be excessive alcohol consumption. And then this cross with a bottom cross includes deaths where tobacco use is in play. Okay, so again, A, which are diseases of the heart, all three of those are going to play a role here. Cancer, which is B. C is cardiovascular diseases, including things like stroke. So again, diet plays a significant role. F is diabetes. H is Alzheimer's disease. I is kidney disease. And so again, in all of those, diet plays a role. So you can see that nutrition is a very important subject. So what exactly is nutrition? So nutrition is the scientific study of food. Okay, you can get a PhD in nutrition, and those individuals, the ones that I trust, they study food. You can also become a registered dietitian, which is a little bit different than having your PhD in nutrition. But again, a registered dietitian is someone that I would go to seek nutritional information. We'll talk more about sources, good sources of nutritional information towards the end of the chapter. So nutrition is the science of food. It includes the study of the nutrients and substances found in food, their action and interaction in relation to health and disease. So what do they do in our bodies? How do they prevent disease? How do they keep us in good health? And then we also include in this definition of nutrition all of the processes by which an organism ingests food, nutrients, digests it, absorbs it, transports it, utilizes it, and excretes it. And so we'll be talking about all of those processes as we go through the chapters this semester. So there's the definition of nutrition. What are nutrients? Move my camera so you can see me here. Nutrients are substances that are essential for human health, that our bodies cannot make or can make, but in not large enough quantities to support life. So these are things that we need to maintain homeostasis, to keep ourselves alive. Essential nutrients have this set of characteristics. They have a specific function inside of our bodies. We call it the biological function. If we were to remove that essential nutrient from our diet, we would see a decline in health, a decline in normal biological function. If we were to then add that substance back into our diet before permanent damage occurs, we would see that biological function restored. Okay, so again, essential nutrients play a specific role in our bodies. Okay, so here are our classes of nutrients that we find in food, and we are going to spend a chapter or a few chapters in some cases specifically talking about these in more detail. In the beginning part of this chapter, I'm going to introduce you to all of these, and then again, we're going to dive in depth as we go throughout the semester. So we can break up these classes of nutrients into two categories, and then we can actually break them up farther, but we can say energy yielding nutrients. So these are nutrients that provide energy to us. And then we've got non-energy yielding nutrients that have other roles in the body, but they don't provide energy. So the energy yielding are going to include carbohydrates. And an example here in this table is glucose. Glucose is a monosaccharide. It's a simple sugar. Glucose is going to be broken down, again, to yield energy. And then our second class are lipids, which includes fats and oils. And here's two examples of essential fatty acids that you may have heard of. Linoleic acid, which is commonly referred to as omega-6, and alpha linoleic acid, which is commonly referred to as omega-3. We're going to come back to those. Proteins. Proteins are made of amino acids, and so here listed in this table are just a few of the 20 naturally occurring amino acids that, again, our bodies need. And then we've got vitamins. Vitamins can be broken up into water-soluble and fat-soluble. We'll talk about the difference. And then minerals can be broken up into the major minerals versus trace minerals. And then some of these other ones over here, we're not going to talk about too much yet. They're called questionable. And then water. Water is a nutrient that you are going to need in large quantities. Okay, so we're going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. But before we do, let's talk about amounts. So we can break up those 6 categories of nutrients into macronutrients and micronutrients. And so macronutrients, as the name implies, macro means, a lot, large. These are going to be nutrients that are needed in large amounts, and those include carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, and of course, water. On the flip side, we've got micronutrients, so micro meaning smaller. These are going to be nutrients that are going to be required, but in relatively small amounts. And so those are going to include both our vitamins and our minerals. Okay, primary functions depends on the nutrient. So some of these are going to strictly provide energy. Others will be important in growth and development. And then some are going to be involved in maintaining homeostasis, so regulating body processes that keep our bodies running smoothly. There is going to be some overlap amongst our nutrient groups. And so on the next table, we break them up by functional category. Okay, so again, we're talking about carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, vitamins, minerals, and water, talking about what do they do. So these are broad categories or functional categories that we can break them up into. So providing energy, carbohydrates are going to be kind of our main energy providers. Proteins sometimes, so we can put them in that category. And then most lipids, including both fats and oils, are going to provide energy. The second functional category, promoting growth and development, we've got proteins here, lipids, some vitamins, some minerals, and water. And then lastly, regulating body processes and helping us to maintain homeostasis. Proteins are really important here, some lipids, some vitamins, some minerals, and water. Okay. If we look at, what makes up the bulk content of most of the foods that we eat, the energy yielding nutrients, so carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, and water are going to make up the bulk majority, the most weight of the food that we eat. Okay, so let's dive a little bit into carbohydrates. And I say a little bit because we're just going to scratch the surface. We will come back to this in chapter 5, where we'll talk about these in more detail. So carbohydrates are going to be made of just 3 elements. We've got carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We primarily obtain carbohydrates in our diet from fruits, vegetables, grains, hopefully whole grains, beans, and sugars. Okay. These are energy yielding, so they provide energy to our bodies, and this number is going to be really important. That's why it's bold here. We're going to use this number throughout the semester. Carbohydrates will yield 4 calories per gram. So every gram of carbohydrate you eat, you get 4 calories from. Okay, and you'll see here on the side I have kilocalories per gram. In actuality, carbohydrates yield 4 kilocalories per gram, but for whatever reason, on food labels and it's just kind of become common practice, we don't use kilocalories. Instead, we just use calories, which are actually 2 different things. But for our purposes for this course, they're going to kind of be used interchangeably. In the nutrition world, they kind of, they unfortunately are used kind of interchangeably. So when you see 4 calories on a food label, or I say, carbohydrates yield 4 calories per gram, it really means kilocalories. But so again, don't worry too much about that. Do know that number 4 though. Carbohydrates yield 4 calories per gram. 2 main types of carbohydrates. We've got simple and complex. And so simple carbohydrates are going to be smaller. They're going to be the mono and disaccharides. So mono means 1, so 1 sugar, and disaccharide, di means 2, so 2 sugars. So here's a couple of examples. So blood glucose. Glucose is going to be a monosaccharide. It's just made up of 1 sugar, glucose. Common table sugar, which is called sucrose. Notice the ending OSE. Sugars are always going to end in OSE. Sucrose is a common disaccharide. It is made up of 1 molecule of glucose and 1 molecule of fructose bonded together. Okay, so we've got mono, 1, glucose is our example, disaccharide, 2, sucrose is our example. And then for our complex carbohydrates, these are called polysaccharides, poly meaning many. So many monomers, many glucose molecules all bonded together. Okay, we got a couple of examples here. So starch. Starch is the way that plants store excess sugar. So that it's a polysaccharide found in plants only. So for example, you've probably heard of starchy vegetables like potatoes. When you're eating potatoes, you're eating polysaccharides, you're eating starch. That's, again, the way that plants store excess sugar. It is a complex polysaccharide. It takes longer for your body to break down than a simple monosaccharide. Glycogen, the second one down here, we're going to talk about this semester for sure. So glycogen is the way that animals, including humans, store excess carbohydrates. And glycogen gets stored in both our liver and our muscle cells. And when glucose levels drop in our blood, this process is hormonally controlled, but glycogen will be triggered to break down to produce more glucose and release that to the blood. And we'll talk about that process. And then lastly, the last example of a complex carbohydrate here is fiber. Fiber is extremely important in our diets. And again, when we get to chapter 5, we'll talk more about the role of fiber. Okay, so in this picture here, again, just to reiterate the difference between a simple carbohydrate, mono and disaccharides, like common table sugar shown here in those sugar cubes. And on the other side here, complex carbohydrates include things like starch and fiber. Both of these we obtain from our diet. So if you're eating, whole grains, starchy vegetables, you're going to be ingesting complex carbohydrates. Very important part of our diet. Okay, so on to lipids. So this is our second macronutrient, also energy yielding. We'll discuss lipids in more detail in chapter 6 when we get there, but for now, just kind of an intro. Lipids includes fats, oils, and cholesterol. These are also going to be composed of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, just a different arrangement than we see in carbohydrates. Lipids are insoluble in water, so you may have heard the term hydrophobic, water-fearing. They don't associate with water. If you've ever put oil into water, you see how they remain separate. Okay, they don't dissolve. Again, these are our second energy yielding type of nutrient. Lipids yield 9 calories per gram, so more than carbohydrates. Carbohydrates were 4, and lipids are 9. So they pack more punch. They've got more energy stored in their bonds. So for every gram of lipid that you consume, you're consuming 9 calories. Okay. Again, we have fats and oils here. Fats are going to be lipids that are solid at room temperature, and oils will be lipids that are liquid at room temperature. And so we'll take a look at both. You've probably heard of triglycerides if you've ever had a blood panel done. Triglycerides are going to be the major form of fat found in our food and also how our body stores fat. And it's going to be a major fuel source that our body's going to use. Okay. Structurally, over here on the right, this is what triglycerides will look like. They're made up of a molecule of glycerol that is then attached to 3 fatty acid chains. Okay, and again, they're made up of carbon and hydrogen mainly, and then there is some oxygen. So in red here, you can see the oxygen. Triglycerides can be either saturated or unsaturated. So again, these are terms that you've probably seen on food labels. So let's dive into these just a little bit. And again, we'll revisit when we get to chapter 6. So if I come over here, this was the molecule that you just saw, the triglyceride, but instead of being that ball molecular model, this is actually showing the structural formula. So here's glycerol, and glycerol is attached to 3 fatty acids. Okay, and if we look here at the fatty acids, the carbon and hydrogen chains here, you'll notice that between the carbon atoms, right, there's all single bonds, just one dash in between them. This right here would be an example of a saturated fat. And so right here is that same structure. Okay, and when you see that, all single bonds, you get a really linear, really straight chain, which causes these chains to, kind of compact, to stack upon one another. And that gives saturated fats, they are going to be solids at room temperature. So a great example here is butter. We've all seen that, right? So at room temperature, butter is hard. It's going to be a solid structure, and that's because it's made up of saturated fats, saturated triglycerides. So saturated fats, solid at room temperature, mainly found in animal sources, and they're, in certain amounts above what we should be consuming, they can be bad. They can raise blood cholesterol levels. They've also been linked to causing cardiovascular disease. Okay, so we should be consuming, lower levels of saturated fats in our diets. On the flip side, unsaturated fats, they're going to be different. And so if you look at this molecular structure here, and right above it, you can see that there's 2 lines between these carbon atoms. And so unsaturated fats have more what we call double bonds in the fatty acid chains. And those double bonds create these kinks, these bends in those fatty acid chains. And so that causes them to not be able to stack on top of each other. There is space in the molecule that's created. And so they're not going to be solid at room temperature. Instead, they're going to be liquid. And so you want to think of oils here. Okay? And again, that's all due to that molecular structure. So unsaturated fats are going to be liquid, usually at room temperature. Unsaturated fats tend to come from plant sources. And again, they're going to be healthier than saturated fats. Actually, 2 more little bits about fats. There's a couple of unsaturated fats that I just wanted to mention here. So these are going to be essential fatty acids. These are unsaturated fats that our bodies cannot produce, that we have to get from our diet, that are really important in our bodies. And so again, you may have heard of these. I mentioned them previously on a couple slides ago on that table. So omega-6 fatty acids, which are also known as linoleic acids, and then omega-3 fatty acids, which are called alpha linoleic acids. Both of these are very important in our bodies. Why? Where do we find them? We find them as structural components of our cell membranes or our cell plasma membranes. This is going to be that outer border of our cell. It's a phospholipid bilayer, and we find these unsaturated fatty acids there. They are also going to be involved in regulating blood pressure, and they play a role in regulating nerve transmission. So again, extremely important. We can't make them on our own. We have to obtain them from our diets. Where do we get these types of essential fatty acids? We can find them in vegetable oils, like canola oil or olive oil, avocado oil, sunflower oil. Those are going to be major sources, and also fatty fish like salmon, sardines. Those are going to be places, types of foods where we can find these essential fatty acids. Really important for our diets. Okay, and lastly for fats, I wanted to end with trans fats. You may have seen the word, trans fats, no trans fats on food labels. And so I just want to kind of briefly introduce you to that here. And again, we'll talk about it in chapter 6 again. So unsaturated fats, we said, were healthier than saturated fats. But there's a little bit more to that story. Unsaturated fats can actually be found in 2 different forms in nature, and we can synthesize these as well. So we have the cis unsaturated form, and we have the trans unsaturated form. And so over here on the left is a little diagram that shows you, here's a double bond down here in this molecule, and in my top molecule here's the double bond. So I want to show you first the cis form. And so this double bond right here in the molecule, you can see creates this kink. Okay, the term cis means same side, and so what that means is that the larger molecular groups that are part of this molecule are on the same side of the double bond. That's the configuration. And what happens in that case is the double bond, where it is and how those other molecules arrange themselves around it, causes there to be a kink in the molecule. In this particular molecule, it literally looks like, a V. If we come down here to the trans form, again, we have a double bond, but instead of the groups, so here's one group and here's the second group, instead of them being on the same side of the molecule, now they're in the trans configuration, so they're on 2 different sides of the molecule. Okay, they're in trans, we say. When that happens, notice the shape of the molecule. There's no kink in it. There's no V. Instead, it's very linear. It's straight. So a trans fat behaves like a saturated fat. And so trans fats, we say, are not so great for us, right? The cis form is much better, especially trans fats that have been synthetically produced or artificially produced. So there's a process called hydrogenation that can be done in industrial settings that will take nice, healthy, cis unsaturated fats and actually turn them into trans fats. Those are not good. They've been shown to pose health risks. What types of foods, can contain trans fats? So deep fried foods, baked snack foods, solid fats. Fortunately, in the United States back in 2015, trans fats were actually banned. And that went into effect in 2018, and so foods now cannot have artificially added or artificially produced trans fats. Trans fats still do occur naturally, so they may not be at 0, but food manufacturers cannot do this hydrogenation process anymore. And so we still have deep fried foods, right? But if we look at the fats, they're not going to be trans fats in those. That doesn't necessarily make those foods good for us, but getting rid of trans fats was a good step, a step in the right direction. However, just to kind of add to that, when you see food labels that say, no trans fats, nothing, trans fats are not allowed anymore. So that's kind of a marketing ploy. So watch out for that. Okay. All right, we're on to proteins. We'll go back to lipids when we get to chapter 6. So quickly to introduce you to proteins, we will talk more about these in chapter 7. Proteins, like lipids and carbohydrates, are made up of carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen, but proteins also have the element nitrogen. So that's something different. Over here on the left, on the very left, you can see this. It says amino acid structure. So proteins are made up of amino acids. That is their monomeric subunit, we call them, right? That's what they're made of. Here's some examples of some amino acids. We got glycine, leucine, aspartic acid. There's 20 naturally occurring. All of them have the same backbone. So if I come back here to the amino acid structure, they're all made up of an amino group attached to a carbon, attached, I should say covalently bonded, you may have heard that, to a carboxylic acid group. Where's my pointer? There it is. So here's the acid group over here. The difference between the 20 amino acids is what's here. Okay, this is going to vary depending on which amino acid that we're looking at. The rest of this, so again, amino group, carbon, hydrogen, and acid group is going to be the same. Okay, as we link amino acids together, we end up with a protein, right? So many amino acids in a chain eventually kind of fold up and get a proper three-dimensional form. We call that the protein. What do they do? So they are going to be the main structural components in the body. They have various functions. Proteins are pretty diverse. We find proteins, in all of our cells, outside of our cells. They are major structural components throughout our bodies. Here's a couple of examples. So they're going to be a main structural component of bone, muscles, blood. We're going to find them in our cell membranes. They have structural importance there. They also have other jobs in our cell membranes. Proteins are enzymes. They're going to regulate all of the metabolic activity inside of your body. They're also involved in immune response. So, for example, antibodies, they are proteins. Your body typically uses little protein to meet energy needs. However, protein can provide energy. And so how much? Just like carbohydrates, you want to make sure you know this number. Proteins provide 4 calories per gram. So carbohydrates, 4, proteins, 4, lipids, 9. Okay, those are really important numbers. That's calories per gram. Okay, where do we get protein from in our diet? Protein-rich foods include things like nuts and beans, meat, fish, poultry, eggs, dairy, right? Yogurt, milk, all high in protein. Tofu, lentils, beans. So, there's a lot of really protein-rich foods. Here's a couple of examples of some proteins that are really important in our bodies. So here on the left, underneath our picture of food sources, we see the protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a protein that's really important. It's found in our red blood cells. It is responsible for carrying, picking up, and transporting oxygen from our lungs to all of the cells and tissues in our body. That is how our tissues get oxygen, carried through the bloodstream in red blood cells, carried by oxygen. Okay. On the right is, we call it the primary structure of a protein called glucagon. Again, really important protein. Glucagon is a hormone. It is secreted by the pancreas, and it's involved in regulating blood glucose levels. We're going to come back to this one as well. So it's involved in homeostasis. It stimulates a process called glyconeogenesis, which is a process that we will talk about, and that happens inside the liver. It triggers glycogen breakdown so that glucose can be released into the bloodstream. So again, really important protein. It's a hormone. Okay, so we're done with proteins. We're going to quickly go through vitamins and then minerals. So vitamins we're going to cover in more detail in chapters 12 and 13 towards the end of this semester. But for now, just an introduction. Again, the main function of vitamins, they're a micronutrient, not a macronutrient. And they're not energy yielding. right? And so the job of vitamins is not to provide energy. So you won't see, calories per gram here. That doesn't happen with vitamins. Instead, they're involved in enabling chemical reactions to occur. So they're required to release energy, but they don't actually provide energy themselves. There are 13 vitamins that are going to be important, and they're going to be divided into two groups. We've got fat-soluble and water-soluble. Fat-soluble vitamins, in order to absorb them, you have to take in some dietary fat. So fat is really important in our diets for the absorption of these vitamins. Included here are vitamins A, D, E, and K. Those are our fat-soluble vitamins. Really important in the proper dose, right? So there's a certain amount of these vitamins that you need. Going over the daily recommended amount, for a prolonged period of time can be bad. Fat-soluble vitamins have a higher tendency to accumulate in the body, specifically in fat tissue, and they can cause toxicity, especially vitamin A. Okay, so again, we'll come back to that when we get to those later chapters. The water-soluble vitamins include vitamin C, which you've probably heard of, and the whole slew of B vitamins that we'll get to. These are a little bit less stable. They are more likely to become destroyed by cooking. And so sometimes eating raw foods, like raw fruits and vegetables, are the better way to go. These don't tend to accumulate in the body. They, again, because they're water soluble, they're excreted from the body with waste more readily. Okay, and so what do they do? Kind of broad functions here. Some of these vitamins are involved in energy production. Some of them are involved in keeping your tissues healthy. Some are involved in optimizing blood health, and then some fall into this category of being antioxidants. Antioxidants help prevent cells and tissues against what we call oxidative damage. Okay. On to minerals. So minerals are going to be inorganic substances. What does that mean? They don't contain carbon, bond to hydrogen atoms. These are not destroyed by cooking. They also do not yield energy, so there is no calories per gram here. They are required for normal body function, so they are a micronutrient. Two major groups, major and trace. The major minerals are needed in relatively higher amounts than the trace minerals. They're needed in grams per day. Some examples here are things like sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, phosphorus, all probably that you've heard of. Trace minerals are needed in relatively smaller amounts, in under 100 milligrams, or in the microgram amount daily. Some examples here are iron, zinc, copper, and selenium. What do they do? Various things, okay? Again, some are involved in energy conversion. Some are involved in, they're called electrolytes, and they're involved in maintaining homeostatic hydration, muscle function, making sure that your muscles can function properly. Some are involved in maintaining healthy blood, and some are involved in keeping bones healthy. Getting close to the end of this first part. We've got water and just one more other thing to touch on. So water is a macronutrient. It's needed in the largest quantity. You need a lot of water per day. And we'll talk about how much as we go on. Several vital functions. First off, before I get into that, I just wanted to make sure you knew that depending on the cell type, but on average, about 70% of our cells is water. If we look at your whole human body, again, on average, this can vary depending on age and sex and things like that. But on average, about 60% of our bodies is water. So we're made up mostly of water. What does water do? Lots of stuff. So it acts as a solvent. So all of those reactions that are taking place, inside of your body, water is a solvent, allowing those reactions to take place. Water is involved in transporting nutrients, regulating body temperature. It acts as a lubricant. Where do we get water from? Obviously, we can drink it, right? We can also get it from our food. So if you're eating, fruits and vegetables, those are going to be high in water. And it's also a byproduct of our metabolism. Okay. All right. Coming close here. So not in our list of macro or micronutrients, not on the list of being an essential nutrient, are these things called phyto and zoochemicals. Okay, what are these? These are both physiologically active compounds, so they have a role in our bodies. Phytochemicals are found in plants, and zoochemicals are found in animals. Again, not essential nutrients. However, they've both been shown to provide significant health benefits, such as reducing the risk of cancer and reducing the risk of cardiovascular disease. So very important. Sometimes these are referred to as functional foods. Both of these are found in large quantities in functional foods. We'll get to functional foods in just a second. Okay, here's some examples of phytochemicals and zoochemicals. And you'll notice in this table it says understudied. More research is definitely needed into these. I'm not going to go through the whole list with you. Let me pick out a couple. For example, carotenoids like lycopene. These are found in orange, red, and yellow fruits and vegetables. It's also found in egg yolks. Capsaicins found in chili peppers. Flavonoids found in citrus fruits, onions, apples, grapes, red wine, tea, etc. How about one from an animal source, sphingolipids, found in meat and dairy. Again, research is still being conducted on these to find out exactly what they're doing, but again, many of these have been shown to promote health, lower the risk of disease. Lastly, we'll come back to functional foods. So functional foods can be rich in phyto and zoochemicals, these chemicals that again are not considered essential nutrients but have been shown to really have positive health effects. Like reducing disease risk, promoting optimal health. They can be found naturally, so foods may naturally have phyto or zoochemicals, which makes them a functional food, or foods may be modified, or these types of things may be added, and so they become modified foods that are functional foods. And so over here in this table are just some examples that you can kind of read through. Again, I'll just touch on the top one. These are conventional foods, unmodified, nothing's been added. Fruits, vegetables, spices, nuts, dairy products, fish, all contain, they are rich in either phyto or zoochemicals, which makes them functional foods. And again, you could have modified foods, fortified, enriched. There are medical foods that fall into this functional food category. And then there are special dietary foods, which again have ingredients that promote health and reduce disease risk. So we call them functional foods. So that's it for this first part of the chapter. It's the longest part.